Keanu Reeves, the man known for his silence, his strength, his mysterious calm, walked onto Jimmy Kimmel's stage like he had 1,000 times before. Smiling, collected, unshaken. But what happened next? No one saw coming. In the middle of a light-hearted interview, one question changed everything. For the first time in his entire career, Keanu spoke about the man he never talks about, his father. And within minutes, the world watched as one of Hollywood's most private stars broke down in tears and walked off set. This wasn't a movie. This wasn't scripted. This was real. It started like any other late-night talk show. Keanu Reeves, calm and composed as always, walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live stage to thunderous applause. Dressed in his signature black suit, his long dark hair tucked neatly behind his ears, he looked like the effortlessly cool, humble superstar fans have adored for decades. He flashed a modest smile, nodded politely to the crowd, and took his seat opposite Jimmy with the grace and humility that have defined his decades-long career. The vibe was relaxed, cheerful, just another celebrity appearance. They joked about the latest John Wick film, poked fun at his motorcycle obsession, and even shared a laugh over a bizarre story involving a fan who thought Keanu was a real assassin. He played along, smiling, his quiet charm lighting up the room. The audience laughed, clapped, and everything seemed normal. Keanu was in his element, gracious, understated, magnetic. But then, Jimmy, in his usual casual tone, leaned forward with a question that no one expected would change the tone of the night entirely. Keanu, you've been through a lot in life. We rarely hear you talk about your family, especially your father. Is that something you ever think about? There was a pause. Just a second or two, but it felt like time froze. Keanu's body shifted. His smile faded. His gaze dropped, slowly, to the desk between them. The silence in the room was deafening. It was the kind of silence that makes everyone instinctively hold their breath, sensing something deeper was unfolding. He finally replied, quietly, "My father, that's a complicated story." The tone of his voice changed. It wasn't the controlled, composed actor anymore. It was Keanu, the man, stripped of the screen presence. His vulnerability was visible, raw. Then he continued, slowly, carefully, as if each word had weight. "He left when I was just 3 years old. I don't really remember his face. I remember shadows, silence, a lot of silence." The audience didn't move. Jimmy didn't interrupt. And Keanu kept going, not because he had planned to, but because, in that moment, the years of silence inside him began to speak. "I used to wait by the window on my birthdays, hoping he'd show up. He never did. Every year, I told myself, maybe this time. Maybe he'll come back." His voice cracked slightly. He swallowed hard, blinking more than usual. It was clear he was holding back tears. And the audience, still frozen, caught between awe and heartbreak. Keanu spoke of the confusion, the loneliness, and how, as a child, he blamed himself for his father's absence. He talked about watching other kids with their dads and wondering what that must feel like. About how that invisible absence shaped much of who he became, independent, guarded, relentlessly private. "There's this photo I've kept since I was a kid," he said, pulling a small, folded image from inside his jacket. "It's the only picture I have of him. I used to keep it under my pillow." He held it in his hands, gently unfolding it, as if it were made of glass. The studio cameras zoomed in slightly, but respectfully. No dramatic music. No sound effects. Just Keanu. A man holding a piece of his past he rarely let anyone see. He stared at the photo for a few seconds, then placed it on the desk in front of him. Then, something unexpected happened. His shoulders trembled. His jaw tightened. And with a faint, almost inaudible, "I'm sorry," Keanu stood up and walked off stage. No fanfare. No storming out. Just a man overwhelmed by a memory he had carried silently for too long. The room was absolutely still. Jimmy Kimmel sat stunned. He glanced toward the camera, then back toward the direction Keanu had gone, unsure what to say. The audience, too, was frozen in respect. No murmurs. No confusion. Just silence. And then, one person in the audience began clapping. A soft, slow clap of respect, not for a performance, but but for a moment of truth. Others followed. Within seconds, the entire audience stood on their feet. It wasn't applause for entertainment. It was applause for courage. Keanu returned moments later. His eyes red, but his voice calm. "I didn't mean to break down," he said gently, offering a small, apologetic smile. I've never spoken about him before. Not like that." Jimmy reached across the desk, placing a comforting hand on Keanu's. "That was the most honest moment we've ever had on this show," he said sincerely. "Thank you for trusting us with it." What followed was not more questions, not more jokes, but a genuine human conversation. Keanu talked about forgiveness, about how he never hated his father, only missed what could have been. He shared how he's tried to let go of resentment, and how those quiet wounds helped shape his empathy, his kindness, his resilience. The interview closed not with a plug for a movie or a teaser trailer, but with a message. "Whatever you're going through," Keanu said to the camera, "just know you're not alone. Sometimes the people who hurt us don't come back. But we can still choose how we move forward." That night, the interview aired and spread like wildfire online. Clips flooded social media. Fans praised Keanu's bravery, his vulnerability, and his honesty. Many shared their own stories, of estranged parents, of abandonment, of healing. It became more than a talk show segment. It became a moment of connection. In an industry known for acting, this was real. And in a world that often teaches men to bury their feelings, Keanu Reeves reminded everyone that even the quietest voices carry the deepest truths. He walked on stage as a celebrity, but he walked off as a human being. For the first 10 minutes, the interview was light-hearted. They talked about the John Wick movies, Keanu's intense training, his fight choreography, and a particularly brutal scene that took 17 takes to get just right. The audience loved it. Then came the motorcycles, one of Keanu's great passions. He shared stories about long road trips across the desert, the freedom he feels on the open road, and even a near accident he laughed about now, but admitted was terrifying at the time. Then Jimmy brought up a strange, hilarious story about a raccoon that had somehow made it onto a film set and startled one of the stuntmen. Keanu chuckled, his shy smile warming the room. His awkward charm, humble nature, and kind energy were on full display. Everything was going perfectly. It was entertaining, it was fun, it was safe. Then Jimmy leaned back in his chair and changed the tone completely. "Keanu," he said with a calm, almost careful voice, "you've been through a lot in life. We rarely hear you talk about your family, especially your father. Is that something you ever think about?" It was a simple question, softly spoken. But in an instant, the air in the studio changed. Keanu paused. He didn't respond immediately. The smile that had been on his face just moments earlier slowly faded. His eyes drifted downward, not in annoyance, not in anger, but in a way that suggested he had been caught off guard. That the question touched a place he usually kept locked away. The audience grew quiet. The laughter stopped. You could sense something shifting, not just on the stage, but in the hearts of everyone watching. Because people knew. You don't ask someone like Keanu Reeves about his past lightly. Behind that calm presence, behind the action hero exterior, was a man known to carry quiet pain. After a long pause, Keanu looked up and said, almost in a whisper, "My father!" Then he took another pause. That's a complicated story." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted from curiosity to emotional weight. Because for the first time in over 30 years of interviews, Keanu Reeves opened up about something he had never really talked about before. "My father left when I was 3 years old," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I don't remember him, not really. Just vague images, maybe a sound or a smell, but nothing clear." He didn't look at Jimmy or the audience. He spoke like someone reading aloud from a journal they never thought they'd share. It wasn't for sympathy. It wasn't for attention. It was a release, words he had carried in silence, now being spoken into the world. "I used to wait for him," he continued, his eyes fixed on a spot in the distance. "On my birthdays, I'd sit by the window, convinced that maybe this year he'd show up. That maybe he'd knock on the door, take me out for ice cream, say he was sorry. But he never came." The audience was completely silent. No coughs, no shifting chairs, No whispered conversations. Just stillness. As if everyone there knew they were witnessing a moment far too real for television. "I blamed myself for a long time," Keanu said. "Kids do that, you know. When someone leaves, you wonder what you did wrong. What you could have done differently. But I was just a kid. I didn't do anything wrong." His voice cracked ever so slightly at the end of that sentence, and he took a breath, as if steadying himself. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small, folded photograph. It was creased and faded, clearly old. He held it up but didn't show it to the camera. "This is the only picture I have of him," he said. "It's from when I was a baby. I don't know why I've kept it all these years. I used to sleep with it under my pillow." He unfolded it carefully, his fingers trembling just a little. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between sadness and peace, like someone holding a piece of their past that still had the power to sting. Jimmy Kimmel, who usually had a quick joke or a clever line ready for any situation, sat completely still. He wasn't a host in that moment. He was a listener, just like everyone else. Keanu stared at the photo for a few seconds longer, then carefully folded it back up. He looked up and gave a small, sad smile. "It's funny," he said. "You can go your whole life pretending something doesn't hurt, until one day, someone asks you about it, and the truth just spills out." Then, without warning, Keanu stood up. He placed the photo back in his jacket pocket and softly said, "I'm sorry." He turned and walked off stage. No anger. No drama. Just quiet emotion. The room didn't erupt in confusion. No one shouted or asked questions. There was just silence. And then, slowly, respectfully, someone in the back of the audience started clapping. One person, then another, until eventually the entire room stood in applause. Not because of a performance, but because of something far more real: courage. Keanu returned a few minutes later. His eyes were a little red, but his demeanor was calm. "I didn't expect to go there," he said gently. "Thank you for letting me." And in that moment, people saw a different side of Keanu Reeves. Not the action hero, not the movie star, but the human being. A man who carried invisible wounds, and who had finally, for the first time, let the world see one of them. That moment wasn't about fame or ratings. It was about truth. And in a world where truth is rare, Keanu's honesty was unforgettable. Keanu Reeves rarely talks about his past. Not because he's hiding something, but because it hurts. He's known for his quiet humility, his generosity, and his calm, almost monk-like presence. He's faced more pain than most actors ever reveal. And yet, he never plays the victim. He never asks for sympathy. But on that night, during an interview on Jimmy Kimmel Live, something inside him shifted. And for a few moments, the world saw the weight Keanu had been carrying for decades. The interview started off light and fun, as expected. They joked about his John Wick stunts, his love for motorcycles, and the time a raccoon snuck onto a movie set. Keanu was charming, a little awkward, but completely authentic, the way fans have come to love him. Jimmy asked him about his upcoming roles and even teased him about being the internet's boyfriend. Laughter filled the studio, the audience clapped, and everything felt routine. Then came a question. One that Jimmy asked gently, perhaps without knowing what it would unlock. "Keanu, you've been through a lot in life. We rarely hear you talk about your family. Especially your father." The atmosphere changed instantly. Keanu's smile faded. His eyes dropped. His body language shifted. There was a moment of silence, just a few seconds, but it felt like time froze. The audience went quiet. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, sensing the change. And Keanu, for the first time in years, let down the wall he had kept up for most of his career. "My father," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He left when I was just 3 years old. I barely remember his face. I just remember the silence." His words were slow, deliberate. Not for drama, but because each sentence cost him something. He wasn't acting. He wasn't telling a rehearsed story. He was revisiting a wound. Keanu's father, Samuel Nowlin Reeves Jr., had walked out on the family when Keanu was just a toddler. His mother, Patricia, was left alone to raise Keanu and his sister. They moved often, from Lebanon to Australia to Canada, chasing work, trying to make ends meet. There was no stability. No phone calls from his dad. No birthday cards. Not even a goodbye. I used to sit by the window on my birthdays, hoping he'd show up, Keanu said, his voice shaking. He never did. You could hear a pin drop in the studio. The camera slowly zoomed in, but respectfully. No dramatic music. No forced emotion. Just a man sitting with a truth he had never said aloud in front of millions. As a kid, you blame yourself, Keanu said, his eyes glistening. You think, was I not good enough? Did I do something wrong? And when no one gives you answers, that question becomes part of you. I carried that question into adulthood. Jimmy Kimmel, known for his quick wit and light-hearted tone, didn't say a word. He just listened. Because in that moment, there was nothing to add. It wasn't an interview anymore. It was a revelation. And then came the moment that broke Keanu. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and folded. It was a photograph, old, faded, and clearly handled more times than it should have survived. He held it in both hands, unfolding it gently, as if it were sacred. This is the only picture I have of him, he said. It's from when I was a baby. I used to keep it under my pillow. I was hoping it would help me feel close to him. Or maybe remind me that he was real. His hands were visibly trembling. His voice cracked. He stared at the photo, but didn't show it to the camera. It wasn't for us. It was for him. The audience sat motionless. No coughing. No whispering. Just a heavy silence filled with shared emotion. People weren't just watching a celebrity open up. They were witnessing a human being break through years of quiet pain. Keanu didn't cry. But his eyes were red. His lips quivered slightly. And after a few long seconds, he softly said, "I'm sorry." He stood up. He gently folded the photo and tucked it back into his pocket. And then, without any dramatic gesture or show, he walked off stage. No one stopped him. No one called after him. Because everyone understood, this wasn't a scripted moment. It wasn't part of a segment. This was real. And real pain doesn't wait for applause. The studio remained still. Jimmy sat quietly, unsure what to do or say. And then, after several seconds, someone in the audience began clapping. Not the usual enthusiastic applause, but slow, gentle, respectful. Others joined. It became a standing ovation, not for a performance, but for the courage it took to be that vulnerable. Keanu returned a few minutes later. He had composed himself. But his voice was softer. His presence, even more sincere. I didn't plan to talk about that, he said. But maybe someone out there needed to hear it. And that was it. No self-pity. No dramatic closure. Just quiet strength. The clip of that moment would later go viral online. Not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. People from all over the world shared their own stories of abandonment, of grief, of healing. Keanu had unknowingly opened a door for others to process their own pain. He reminded the world that even the most beloved, most stoic heroes have scars. That strength isn't about hiding your past, it's about facing it. And for those few minutes on stage, Keanu Reeves did just that. He didn't just speak. He healed. Even if just a little. There was a moment of silence so thick, you could hear the cameras humming. The air in the studio hung heavy with emotion. It was as if time had paused, everyone holding their breath, unsure of what to say or do. Jimmy Kimmel, usually so quick with a comeback or a witty remark, sat completely frozen in his chair. He glanced off stage where Keanu Reeves had just quietly walked out, leaving behind a trail of something far deeper than a celebrity anecdote. The audience, stunned into silence, looked around at each other, eyes wide, hands still, not sure if they had just witnessed a breakdown or a breakthrough. Then, from the back of the studio, a sound broke through the stillness, a single pair of hands clapping. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It was slow, steady, respectful. And it carried a message louder than any words. We see you. We hear you. Thank you. That one person's gesture sparked something. Others began to stand, joining in. The quiet studio transformed into a standing ovation, not one filled with cheers, but with solemn recognition. They weren't clapping because of the interview. They weren't clapping for a joke or a movie. They were clapping because a man had stood in front of the world and dared to show his wounds. Within seconds, the entire studio was on their feet. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded, hands coming together in soft applause. The moment felt sacred, not just because of what had been said, but because of how real it had been. Keanu Reeves, a man known for his privacy and humility, had opened a part of his heart that he had kept hidden for decades. And the audience responded not with questions or gossip, but with gratitude. Backstage, Keanu sat alone for a few minutes, trying to collect himself. He wasn't embarrassed, just overwhelmed. He hadn't planned to talk about his father. He hadn't rehearsed the story. It had simply come out, as if it had been waiting for years for the right moment. A quiet space. A genuine question. A little permission to be human. When he finally returned to the stage, the applause was still going. He stepped out slowly, his posture a little more relaxed but his eyes still glassy. He smiled, softly, sincerely. And when he reached Jimmy, he leaned into the mic and said, "Sorry. I didn't expect to go there." Jimmy, who had also been holding back his emotions, didn't hesitate. He stood up and placed a comforting hand on Keanu's shoulder. "That," he said, "was the most human moment we've ever had on this show." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Because in a world full of media moments, viral clips, and overproduced celebrity interviews, this one stood out. There were no flashy lights, no clever one-liners. Just truth. Just pain. Just a man brave enough to face something most of us spend a lifetime running from. Keanu sat back down and took a deep breath. "You know," he said with a half-smile, "I've done hundreds of interviews. And I've always kept certain things to myself, not because I'm ashamed, but because I never wanted to make it about me. But sometimes, you realize that by sharing something hard, maybe someone out there feels a little less alone." Jimmy nodded. "You probably just helped more people than you realize." Keanu continued, his voice steadier now. "We all carry stuff. Stuff we never talk about. Stuff we think we've buried. But it doesn't go away. Not really. It just waits. And sometimes it waits until you're sitting under bright lights, in front of millions of people, to finally come out." The audience laughed gently, not at him, but with him, relieved to see he could still smile, even after everything. They wrapped up the interview with lighter questions, but the tone had changed. The usual banter wasn't there, and it didn't need to be. What had happened was bigger than promoting a film. Bigger than a show. It was a reminder that behind every famous face is a person with a story, often more painful than we imagine. Later that night, the clip was uploaded online. It spread like wildfire. Not because it was dramatic or scandalous, but because it was honest. Comments flooded in from around the world. Thousands of people shared their own stories of abandonment, of growing up without a parent, of wondering if they were ever enough. And again, they thanked Keanu. Not for the movies. Not for the fame. But for showing them that even someone like him, rich, successful, beloved, still carried pain. And that it's okay to talk about it. In the days that followed, Keanu didn't give any follow-up interviews. He didn't post on social media. He didn't turn the moment into a talking point. He simply went back to his life, quietly and humbly, as he always does. But for those who watched, who felt every word he said that night, something had changed. Because Keanu Reeves reminded us of something the world often forgets. Strength doesn't mean staying silent. Bravery isn't always loud. And healing begins the moment we stop pretending we're okay. And sometimes, the most powerful moments aren't scripted at all. They're simply human. This wasn't just a celebrity crying on TV. It wasn't a publicity stunt or a carefully crafted emotional arc designed to go viral. It was something much more powerful. Something raw. Something human. In a world full of polished appearances, media training, and fake headlines, this moment stood completely apart. It was unfiltered truth. Keanu Reeves, an actor known more for his silence than his speeches, more for his quiet kindness than dramatic displays, had done something that most celebrities never dare to do. He let the mask fall. And what people saw behind it changed them. As the clip from Jimmy Kimmel Live aired across the world, it didn't take long for it to spread. But this time, the internet wasn't talking about box office numbers or flashy stunts or who was dating who. No, the conversation was different. Because Keanu didn't just reveal pain, he gave others permission to feel theirs too. The man who played fierce assassins, time-traveling slackers, and tragic heroes had suddenly become the most relatable person in the room. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Quietly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether the words should even be spoken aloud. As if he'd carried them for so long that speaking them made them real again. "My father left when I was 3, he had said, his voice barely holding steady. I barely remember his face. I just remember the silence." That one sentence held a lifetime of abandonment, of unanswered questions, of quiet longing. It broke through screens and into people's hearts. And then, of course, there was the photograph. That old, faded picture of his father, the only one Keanu had. He said he kept it under his pillow as a kid, hoping it would make him feel closer to someone who never came back. That detail haunted people. Because it was the kind of detail you don't make up. It wasn't for sympathy. It was just the truth. The truth of a boy who waited by the window, birthday after birthday, hoping for a knock that never came. When he stood up and walked off stage, the world didn't see a celebrity storming out. They saw a man overwhelmed by years of quiet pain. They saw a person who had carried something heavy in silence for so long that letting it go, even for a moment, was too much. And when he returned minutes later, apologizing softly, it wasn't weakness. It was strength in its purest form. Jimmy Kimmel's response summed up what millions were thinking. That was the most human moment we've ever had on this show. And he was right. It wasn't just another interview. It was a mirror, reflecting back to every viewer the wounds they carry but never speak about. Childhood abandonment. Fatherless homes. Questions that never got answers. Guilt that never made sense. Keanu's story wasn't unique, but his courage in telling it was. After the episode aired, social media lit up, not with jokes or memes, but with gratitude. People from all corners of the globe flooded comment sections with messages like, "Keanu, you're not alone. Thank you for being real. That moment helped me confront my own childhood wounds." Therapists, teachers, fathers, sons, daughters, everyone was talking about it. Not because it was scandalous, but because it felt safe. Keanu had opened the door. And for a moment, millions of people stepped through it. They looked at their own pain differently. They felt less alone. And many said so openly. Some even reached out to estranged parents. Others started therapy. A few simply cried for the first time in years. This is the ripple effect of honesty. Keanu Reeves didn't intend to make headlines. He wasn't there to go viral. He was promoting a movie, just another stop in a long press tour. But something about the setting, the timing, maybe even Jimmy's gentle tone, unlocked a memory that had stayed sealed for too long. And when he let it out, the world responded not with mockery, but with compassion. There's a reason Keanu is so widely beloved, not just as an actor, but as a person. It's not because he's flashy or controversial or loud. It's because he reminds people of what decency looks like, of how humility still matters, of how kindness doesn't have to be shouted. And now, he reminded the world of something else too, that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's strength. Real strength isn't about hiding pain. It's about facing it, speaking it, sitting with it without turning away. And that night, Keanu did all three. He didn't need to follow up with a tweet. He didn't issue a statement. He didn't turn the moment into a marketing ploy. He just went back to being himself. Quiet, grounded, present. But something had changed. People began to see him not just as an actor, but as a symbol. A symbol of what it looks like when someone refuses to let pain make them bitter. A symbol of healing that doesn't come in a single dramatic moment, but in small acts of truth-telling. In letting others in. In saying, "This hurt me," and trusting that the world will understand. And the world did understand. Not because Keanu cried, but because, in a world that constantly tells us to move on, stay strong, and never show weakness, Keanu Reeves reminded us that the strongest thing we can do is simply be honest. In a world that often tells men to hide their emotions, Keanu Reeves reminded us that real strength is found in honesty. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments. Have you ever carried a wound silently? Share your story. You never know who you might help. Backhand index pointing right, like this video if you believe vulnerability is courage. Bell subscribe for more real, powerful stories like this. Outbox tray, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Until next time, stay human, stay kind.